Alrighty, guys, we might get started here. Thank you everyone so much for coming along to today's webinar. It's so good to have you here, and over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be covering the document execution workflow app use case, and we'll also share what that looks like in Checkbox. We're very excited to do that together with you. By way of introduction, my name is Min Wu. I'm one of the customer success and delivery leads here at Checkbox. My specialty is in the in-house legal space, so I've been working with our customer base across multiple use cases, including document generation, triage, as well as document execution, which we'll look at today. So a very quick introduction to those of you who may or may not know or might be hearing about Checkbox for the first time. I'll quickly give you an introduction to who we are and what we do. So we're a leading drag and drop automation and workflow platform in the market. And what that means is we enable ordinary business users such as lawyers who may not necessarily have a technical background, although we have obviously met quite a few lawyers who do have a very process and design thinking mindset and skill set to actually build out their own automation software. And this is particularly powerful as they are the subject matter experts. And this is to solve for the use cases I mentioned earlier. And if you'd like more information on things like document creation and triage, you can check out some of our other webinars, which are available as well. Now, we are trusted globally by the best, and you will notice some very familiar names there. We work across many different verticals, across many different functions, and from organizations small and large. Now, in today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on the document execution workflow process, which you may be quite familiar with within your own organization. And it may be sort of coined as a different term. It might be called delegation of authority or DOA process. And it has a very similar mechanism. So if you're kind of coming into this with that use case or title in mind, you've come to the right place. Now, having said that, although we will cover this use case in depth, just know that Checkbox does do much more than document execution, and even does more than legal use cases. So if you've come from some other vertical, this webinar will still apply to you, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. So before we do the first poll, I want to quickly give a background sort of context update on for those people who might not necessarily know the full picture of the document execution process. So what is it, and why is it worth automating, particularly as we think about legal as a function owning this process? So document execution is a fairly simple manual process of getting a formal agreement signed or executed, we call it. And it often involves three parts. So the first part is often the generation of the contract, or the reviewee says, I need to get this contract signed. And then the second phase is where a reviewer will then have a look at it and then determine whether or not that contract is ready to be signed. And then finally, the authorized signatories play the last part of this, three-part dance, and they're the ones who actually sign the agreement before, it's formally able to go into action. Now, although there are three different parties involved, and we will actually see this sort of three-part dance happening inside the Checkbox app as well, it's important to note that what we've noticed is that legal is often the one who is owning this process. So people such as yourself from an in-house legal background, you may have noticed that this process falls under your jurisdiction. And that's for good measure, given that the nature of legal contracts need to be reviewed by legal. So just something worth noting. So with that in mind, with the background of the document execution process in mind, I'm just going to shoot off our first poll today. And it's just kind of get to know who's in the room and how you guys are managing your document execution process. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to answer it now. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and end the poll there. So it looks like of all the people who are in this room, the majority of you guys are managing your document execution process via email. And that's a very normal kind of what we witness and kind of see in the market is kind of being the standard. Other seems to be a pretty popular method as well. So if that was you, would love to chat after this webinar around how you guys are actually managing that. I'm sure there is a pretty intricate way of handling that. And in terms of the priority for improving this process, the majority of us here today would put this on the medium priority, so some alignment to strategy, which is good. You guys are thinking about it, if not high urgent strategic, which is awesome news. So you've come to the right place. Alrighty, so let's come back to the document execution process. And it does look fairly simple. It's a fairly linear process of a business user nominating an agreement, typically either bespoke off a company's template or inbound from a client, who then hands it off to finance or legal, who looks at the finer print of the contract, determines whether or not it needs to be sent back for further amendments. And just keep in mind that second phase typically is an iterative phase, as you may have noticed. So legal or finance may actually push back the contract to the business owner or the business user and say, hey, you're actually missing X, Y, Z. Can you please fill these out before you hand it through? And then finally, obviously, we have the director who then, or the CEO or the company secretary who signs it. These are often people who are quite time poor and want to ensure that the document is fully reviewed before they need to sign it. And actually, what we've seen in the past is that our customers will often have sort of a cover sheet, an internal cover sheet that they won't share with their external clients, but a cover sheet that says, legal have seen it, finance have seen it, they've signed off, and therefore you as the authorized signature, you're ready to sign. So sort of almost like a wet signature process, and you guys may be familiar with that. Now, although this process seems quite simple on paper, there are quite a few pain points involved in the process. Yesterday, I posted something on LinkedIn where Elon Musk was talking about why he's a chief engineer and why there are inherent challenges with coordinating the design of a spacecraft. And he was explaining that the more functions you have, the more people that are involved that aren't communicating to each other in sort of an intra fashion where you're in a team, the more that there are interfaces, and in those interfaces are those errors. And this process is very much subject to those same pain points. For business users, we typically see that their pain points are that they need to sort of reference a massive 40-page document approval, reference that says, if the document is of this type and under this vertical, you need to talk to this manager, which can be quite confusing. And so they're not really sure who needs to review and sign their contract. This often leads to them just kind of passing it on to lawyers via email. For those of you who kind of clicked email, that you would know that pain. And they're also not sure when to escalate those documents. So particularly newer employees, things like, what's the threshold contract value that I need to surpass before I flag with a lawyer? These are sort of the questions that they're probably asking. In terms of the reviewer, from both legal and finance, they typically lack context around the agreement. So a very common story that we hear is that a lawyer will be sent an email that says, can you please review this contract? With no further information around who the external client is. But of course, they can determine that from the contract. But things like which clause they want reviewed, simple things like that aren't included inside the email. And therefore it's quite difficult for lawyers and finance, more legal, to determine what is actually necessary for review. There's also a general lack of transparency around the review process. And that's in part because there's no audit trail. The audit trail really is just an email chain, typically. And what happens is there's often a double up of work. So someone will send a contract to a lawyer, that becomes the dedicated lawyer who looks after that contract. But there are instances where, they might rope in another lawyer if the first lawyer was busy, and therefore there's a double up of work and review. And finally, for the authorized signatory, there's just a general pain point where they may be sent contracts that may not have been reviewed. And so they often get to a point in the journey where they say, has this been reviewed by the right people? Have legal and finance seen it? And so they revert to things like what I mentioned earlier, the cover page where a wet signature is required. It's literally just an internal cover sheet. So it does add to almost the inefficiency, sort of an admin overhead that seems unnecessary. So how do we bypass this? It's clear that there are pain points all throughout the process. And if you're asking that question, obviously, then you've come to the right place. So what we've developed with a lot of our customers is what we call a document execution workflow app. And what it does is it automates the back and forth workflow involved in that execution process. And it uses decision logic to ensure the appropriate stakeholders are involved only when necessary. And this really cuts down on the sort of repetitive nature of review. It cuts down on users having to determine the logic around who needs to review it and who needs to sign it. So it really streamlines that process and makes it easy for everyone involved. So let's jump into this tool now. Let's have a look at what it looks like and kind of see what is possible here. And before I jump in, I would just mention that this journey may look quite different to, from customer to customer. It will obviously depend on your approval matrix and the type of user journey and the type of reviewers and authorized signatories that you have. So keep that in mind as you see this, and maybe have a think about how it might fit into your context. All right, so let's begin this journey pretending that we're a business user. We have a purchase agreement. We're interacting with an external client. We need it reviewed. So let's go ahead. We're going to go into the document execution app. And so just pretend for a moment that if I go ahead and click on that, the tool will pop up. I'll just drag that in here now. Now, when a user clicks on the document execution app, it can be done either through a intranet portal that they have, a triage tool that they have on the intranet portal. And so if you hear, last time we had our webinar, we were looking at the intake and triage use case. You may land on this page. Or conversely, you might just embed it directly into intranet portal as a direct link. Now, when business users click on that link, what they land on is a very simple explanation around what the tool is going to do and things like what they're required to bring. We can change this to a more interactive sort of checklist where they say, hey, I've got my details, I've got the context, I've got a copy of the contract. So all of this information we can edit. So let's continue here. Imagine for a minute that we are Minwoo in the procurement division, and we're procuring something from an external client. And one thing I'll point out here that's very important, because the user journey involves 3 distinct parties, I just want to draw your attention to the top of your screen here where it says preview and then followed by some great texting here. It says Minwoo. So right now we're taking the perspective of a business user, but as we flow and hand off this work to other users in the process, you'll notice that that gray section will change. So at any point, if you feel sort of lost and you're not really sure whose perspective we're taking, always refer to the top of your screen, and that will be the North Star, the guiding light to where you are. Awesome. So once a business user then indicates who they are, they then fill out information about the agreement, and you'll notice there's handy information around things like agreement threshold, just simple tips to help that journey be made a little bit easier. Now, in the event that the particular business user is interacting with a company and it's a counterparty, Checkbox integrates with the ABN register. So you notice that I just copy pasted in the ABN, and immediately the counterparty name as it is pulled directly in. So it looks like we're interacting with the trustee for the Kamikaze Fishing and Camping Trust. Why not? I did spend some time looking that up, so I'm not ashamed of that. And this is a sale agreement, and let's say it's for the sale of fishing hooks. Now, depending on the sort of context behind the agreement, we can bake in logic that pulls in different parties into that approval process. I mentioned that earlier. And you notice the following question says, does the agreement have a financial impact? And obviously, if there is a financial impact, we're going to say that we want to pull in the finance team. A very common story that we hear is that that process is managed on the business user side, where they sort of have to read through a matrix document or allude to a document, on the internet portal that tells them what that information is. The tool takes that burden off of them and ensures that the appropriate contracts do flow through to the right parties. So let's indicate the financial impact. Let's say we're buying $1 million worth of fishing hooks, which is an insane amount, but why not? And we then are given the opportunity to upload our purchase agreement to the platform. Now, this document is going to flow throughout the process, and you'll see it flowing, and even be updated as a result of the interactions that are about to occur. So let's go ahead and click on next there. So after that, all the basic information is fulfilled. We might even have included a text field, something like, what is the context or what would you like reviewed in this particular agreement? So we can always, change that sort of background. And once we fill that out, the tool tells us exactly who this is going to flow to. It says that the approval is going to be for the legal and finance team, and that the signatures will come from the CEO and the CFO. And this is important for their business user because it is going to go almost into like a black box. They're going to input their contract for review, and at the other side will be a signed contract. And so what we have baked in is an email reminder that actually notifies the business user at every stage who is actually looking after their contract and who is waiting to review it or sign it, and where it is in the overall flow. So let's go ahead and click on next. So when I go ahead and click on next, what's going to happen is that we're going to, first of all, be shown a transcript of all our answers, just to ensure that everything's correct. And we can go back and edit those at any time. And when I'm ready to submit it as a business user, we're actually going to change perspective. So Checkbox's workflow functionality allows us to transfer the process entirely over to the next party. So I'll show you that in a second here. So if I go ahead and click on submit, what happens is you'll notice at the top, we're now within the legal team. And what will happen is an email will be sent either to the legal team as a whole, or maybe even to a specific lawyer if the agreement has been part of an ongoing iterative review process. And once the lawyer clicks that link within their email, it'll take them to this landing page. Now, this landing page is fairly useful for the lawyer, and it has a couple of key pieces of information. So the first piece of information is it lets us know who from which department is submitting what type of contract, and that's obviously very handy. We have basic information around who the counterparty is, what the purpose of the agreement is, and things like the financial impact. We also have the ability to download the document off platform and let us review it straight away. Let's put that in here. So as a lawyer, I can do one of three things. The first thing that I can do is I can read it and I can say there's nothing wrong with it. I can approve it. The second option that I can take is I can send it back with changes. Perhaps I'm reading the agreement and I've got it open here for you. Just enable editing and zoom in a little bit. Nope, that's not what I wanted. And I'll scroll down and let's say I've got track changes on because that's obviously common practice. Just scroll down here. Let's say for some reason competitive use of information is not something that we want inside this purchase agreement, and I could include, for instance, some comments as the lawyer within the legal function, and say, "Hi there, it's Bob from legal. Please remove this clause." And we could save that, and we could re-upload a copy of that particular sale agreement to Checkbox. Provide some comments, say, hey, I've left a series of comments, please check them there in the margin, and send it back to the business user who can then make that amendment. And that handles that process of back and forth and leaves an audit trail of all those changes in file format for everyone involved in that process. So in this case, we can also reject the document. Let's say we're just not doing those types of documents anymore, send that back. We can do that as well. But in this case, let's go ahead and approve, just for the sake of example. And what we can do is, as a reviewer, we can provide comments around our review process to enable other people within the review cycle to actually better look at certain clauses. So I might say, hey, it's Bob from legal here. Can you please look at the threshold amount? Does this seem reasonable? Because buying $1 million of fishing hooks could seem unreasonable for a company. So I guess it depends. So after that, I go ahead and I just leave that there. And what happens when I submit it is this is going to transfer over to the next team, which is the finance team. And I'll just show you that here in a second. So once I click on submit, click enter, you notice here at the top again, we've now changed perspective into finance. And in a similar process, finance will receive an email, they'll click a link, it opens up, it lands on this page. And you can see here from the comment history, it again says, Bob from legal, although it is my name. So just imagine that it is the Bob from legal that has their name there. They can see the comment history. They can send it back if they'd like to legal and say, hey, actually, we don't like this terms and condition, or why did you take out the competitive clause? Can you put it back in? Send it back. They can either send it back straight to the business user, or they can send it back to the lawyer. So let's progress as the finance team now. And we're moving on to the finance sign-off. And it looks very similar to the legal sign-off here. And the only difference here is that we have a very helpful line that says it has already been reviewed and signed off by the legal team. So if there are multiple reviewers involved in this process, we could have a list of who those people are, the dates that they signed off, the versions that they signed off. Obviously, we want the most up-to-date version, but we have all of that editable and accessible inside Checkbox. Again, for the sake of example and time, let's just go ahead and pretend that we're just approving here. But just do note that if we were to, click send back, we could upload another copy of the agreement that we've made amendments to. Again, we have the comment history, so let's move on. So now we've come to the end of the second phase, which is the review process, and we're now moving towards the third phase, which is the authorized signature process. Now, what I'm going to show you is sort of a file management way of doing it, but just note that we do have eSign as an option to actually manage this process, either through DocuSign or Adobe Sign, depending on your eSign provider. So now you'll notice here we're part of the CEO group. Again, the CEO will receive an email, and what they'll see is, again, a very similar summary with a note that the legal team has approved it, the finance team has approved it. And in this case, they're going to download the purchase agreement. They're going to sign the agreement in the allotted spot, and they're going to upload the agreement to the platform. So let's just say we have signed it and we upload it, and we send that through. Now we could bake in a review process to ensure the signatures are there. We've seen some of our customers in the past have an admin user check this at the very end. Just note that that is possible to kind of bake in using the logic. Awesome. Similarly, we have the CFO who's part of that process. And again, you'll see at the top, the CFO is now the next workflow group. Receive an email, see the summary, download the document, and they can sign it, and then upload it to Checkbox. And so I'm just speeding through this a little bit, given that it is very similar to the CEO process. So now that we've come to the end of the third stage, both authorized signatories are signed either by downloading off the platform, signing it and re-uploading it, or by using the DocuSign, or sorry, I should say eSign process that we natively have in Checkbox, which will handle that signing process for you. Once that's completed, this will actually be sent back to the business user. And you notice here at the top now we have our business user name. We started off with me. And the business user will be notified that their contract has been reviewed and signed. And it's now been sent back to the business user to say, hey, you're ready to go, you're good to go. That's all there for you. And it's even been emailed, a copy has been emailed into your inbox. Now, one of the cool things, as I mentioned earlier, is that this whole transitional process is tracked on a dashboard that we have in Checkbox. And there's a couple of uses for that. So I'll show you what it looks like here. So the Checkbox dashboard gives you some visual indicators around, the volume, the types of agreements, if you've got sort of set options. And other things that you'll note is you've got a list of all submissions. You have submitter's name. You also have sort of which stage they could be up to. So if it's, if you want to review a stage 1, review a stage 2, you could actually rename these variables and you could have that there. And one of the cool things that the dashboard allows you to do is not only track the progress of all the agreements as well as the agreements specific to business users, it can do two things. The two things that it can do is that it can, first of all, serve as a way to redirect review processes, signing processes. I'll give you an example. We've seen cases in the past where, you get to the end of the year, it's November, and a lawyer that was reviewing your contract may have suddenly gone on holiday, or maybe you have gone on holiday and there were some contracts in your care. And you know that someone needs to redirect those contracts to someone else within the legal team. Well, the structured workflow kind of system that is within Checkbox allows you to redirect review within a team. So if it's a legal team, you can change it from one lawyer to another. And the second way that we can sort of handle and make that process a lot smoother is that we also have a reminder functionality. And that reminder functionality allows you to not only remind them manually and say, hey, I've lost the link, can you send me a reminder? Yep, log in. There's an option here in the actions list that will give you like a send reminder. or there's even automated or scheduled reminders. So after 3, 5, 7, you name it, any number of days, if the document hasn't passed that particular phase, then remind the individual that they need to do that. And so that process is available. I know that a lot of CEOs and CFOs are quite busy, directors are quite busy, so that's definitely a useful tool. Oh, wow, the time has really passed. So let me just hop back to the presentation here. Now, mindful that there have been a few questions that have come through. Just in the interest of time, I'll quickly wrap up here, but I will respond to those questions right after this webinar, so don't fret. Thank you so much for submitting so many questions, which is really great. So if you'd like to sort of chat with me around this use case or any other use cases around automation, feel free to reach out. My LinkedIn and email is available on your screen there. I'm always down for a chat. And also, in terms of building something like this out, we know that there are quite a few people who come along to these webinars and ask, hey, I'd love to build something like this out. Do you guys have, you know, Checkbox Lite, a way to interact? And the answer is yes. So Checkbox has a free trial offer on at the moment. And by virtue of you guys attending this webinar, we actually make that available to you. One of the cool things is we've actually put together a document execution workflow guide on how to set that up within your Checkbox. So if you just follow that, you might have one built within a day. If you can beat the record of 3 hours, then I will shout you out somewhere, maybe on LinkedIn. And so keep that in mind if you'd like to do that. And just note that obviously this will depend largely on your own approval process and matrices within your organization. I will also note, we do have another webinar coming up, and it's called Why Legal Automation in a Post-COVID World, which is fantastic timing given that a lot of us are coming back to the office. We're also asking questions around what really makes sense in terms of what do we keep and what do we automate. So I'm sure that'll be a really exciting one that'll be run by Evan. Again, I'll get back to you guys who have posted all your Q&As. And thank you everyone for attending today. We really appreciate your time. I hope it was useful. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. With that said, thank you so much. We really appreciate you, and we'll catch you at the next one.